Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a beautiful Thursday evening. Welcome to Exploring Ancestral Wisdom and Healing. This is Denise King Francisco, and I am joined, as I always am, each and every month by two of my dear friends, soul family members, David Cad Sturkin and Nicole Fix. Hey, Cad. Hey, Nicole.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Carla Joe. It's good to see you there in the chat room. Good to have you there. And if you're listening, no matter where you happen to be listening from, because I know you're listening in from all parts of Grandmother Earth, please do feel free to join us in the chat room. We would love to have you tonight. We're going to be talking about our ancient ancestry. And when we say ancient, ancient has a lot of definitions. Nicole, when you think of your ancient ancestry, what do you think of?
Oh, gosh, I think of, beyond time where we kind of all go way, way back, right? Traced way back to probably all descendants of the same, person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Cad, what about you when you think of ancient and your ancient ancestry? What do you think of?
Wow, that's a great question. I guess I agree with what Nicole just stated. I think it's maybe going even beyond what I can even imagine or put my hands on. So, yeah.
Excellent. I know for myself, when I think of my ancient ancestry, I always think about myself and my ancestry before physicality. So I go back to the stardust when I think of ancient. And then I think of, so in the beginning of my bloodline lineage, who landed here first? And according to Ancestry.com, at least the first woman in my family was firmly rooted in Africa. And so I take myself back to that point, back to, what we call the motherland of Africa, and watch how the ancestry goes from there. But I often think to myself, what was it like before we came here? Well, what about you, Nicole? Do you ever think about that?
A little bit. I think my mind has a hard time of trying to even conceptualize it because it's so, I don't know, right? Our planet is 200 billion years old or something crazy like that.
Mm-hmm.
So to think back, it's just fascinating, mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
I find that when I'm walking through the streets of Grand Rapids, with taking Max on a walk, there are times I would like to just imagine who were the people that were here before us. We know that there were a lot of Native Americans that were in this area. I kind of imagine their homes and their tribes together. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fascinating to think about who was here before we were. Absolutely.
I like to think about that too. Remember, Cad, when we were on the island of Delos there in Greece?
Oh, yeah.
And we found out that Cleopatra had a home on Delos.
Yep.
Well, the moment that I found out that, Cleopatra had a home and we were able to go stand in the ruins of her home, all of a sudden, antiquity, there it was beneath our feet. And that was a long, 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 long time ago. And to think that we're even older than that in our bloodline, for me, is fascinating. And like you, wherever I go, I always imagine, what did it used to look like? Nicole, have you ever been anywhere and you feel as though you have a deja vu, like you've been there before?
Yes. And that's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? Because, since I was a little girl, my soul always was wanting to go to France.
Uh-huh.
So as soon as I was old enough to get to be part of an exchange program, that's exactly where I wanted to go, and ended up majoring it as part of my undergrad. There's just certain places I think that call us, that sing to us and beckon us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that there have been places that I've traveled to here in the States and well beyond, where I walk into a space and it feels so familiar. The smells smell so familiar. And it's almost as though a rush of history, goes across my inner screen and through my being. And as I've gotten older, I've often wondered to myself, is it me revisiting it? Or is it an ancestor in my bloodline, in my blood and bones, that's saying, oh, you brought me home?
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah.
You had that feeling in Ireland, didn't you, Kat?
Yeah, and it's interesting. There have been places that I have walked into, or either buildings or just other places, where all of a sudden I will just get I get really lightheaded. I start, things kind of start to spin, but it's that feeling like I've been here before. I don't know. As you said, it's like that kind of deja vu feeling, but I don't recognize the place. I remember the door. I was like, oh, I've been here before, but I haven't that I know of.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah.
It's a fascinating feeling. Did you ever have any of those moments when you were in France, Nicole, where something within you said, I've been here, or somebody in my bloodline has been here?
Yeah, yes. And like even traveling like north to the Netherlands, it's just, there's something so moving in it. And, like you said, the smells, and even how that can just bring back such powerful memory that, is it mine, or is this in my bloodline? Is this, what is this?
Uh-huh. I remember the first time being in a spice market in Egypt and walking in and just being washed, the smells and the fragrances washing over me. Yeah. And I just stood in all of the smells and the sound of the busy market. And also the call to prayer was going on at that time. And it all sounded so familiar that it felt almost like it was taking me out of my body. But it was such an old remembrance from the depth of my soul. And, for myself, I will say that I do believe in reincarnation. I believe that we have way more than just one rodeo in a given lifetime. But that wasn't something that I necessarily learned growing up. What about you, Nicole?
Oh, yes. I remember being a very young girl and just knowing, I have a vivid memory of being about 5, looking in the mirror and saying, like, it's so weird that I picked this life. So I've always had the, like my old soul, my old Piscean soul, but just this recognition that there's something much deeper going on. And, memories, things can call us back, right? That deja vu you're describing. And I know, like, when I hear church bells ringing, it's so moving for me, that it's, soul stirring. Mm-hmm. So, always believing in reincarnation. Like people would say it like it's the craziest thing in the world. And I'm like, well, duh, like this is, makes such sense to me.
So, Kat, did you grow up believing in reincarnation or knowing about it?
No, absolutely. Actually, it wasn't, I don't think, well, I know it wasn't until much later in my life that I really started to realize that, yes, I've experienced other lifetimes. And no, that growing up in a very conservative Christian background, reincarnation was not really part of kind of their belief system. And so, it was, you die, you go to heaven, and that's where you sit on the cloud and play your harp for the rest of your life. So
yeah.
Or for eternity.
Yeah. Well, it was my daughter Elise who introduced me to reincarnation when she was 2. But I remember, when she reminded me that she was my mother in a previous life. But I remember very vividly having a conversation with a Catholic nun from Ireland who called late one night. And Elise came upstairs with the phone and she said, Mom, I was in the bathtub. She said, Mom, there's a nun from Ireland on the phone, right? So obviously in Elisa's mind, she had priority, even though I was in the bathtub. So I answered the phone, of course, and I said, "Sister, how may I help you?" And it was another nun who had referred her to me, a nun from Los Angeles. And she said, "Well, Denise," she said, her name was Sister Mairead. She said, "I've lived 3 consecutive lifetimes as a cloistered nun. And my father, before he passed, released me from this last bit of being cloistered." I was dumbfounded.
Yeah.
I said, "Well, Sister Mairead, you'll just have to excuse me because this is the first conversation that I've had with a Roman Catholic nun about reincarnation." And she started to laugh, as the Irish do. And she said, "Oh my goodness. It's astounding how many of the old teachings were lost coming across the pond to get to America." And it just struck me that it was just natural for her to talk about lifetimes and choices in lifetimes.
Yeah.
And then it made me wonder, so how many of my ancestors have I been to myself? Have you ever wondered that?
I haven't until you pointed it out, and then I thought, well, Alfie, that is probably a great question. You know, because I feel connected to some of like my great grandmothers that I have never met or know. You know, like there's some connection there. So it's like, could that have been me? It's fascinating to think about.
Yeah. Kat, have you ever had that feeling that you were one of your ancestors in a past life?
Well, I can't say that I really haven't thought about that. I mean, there have been times where I've seen myself in past life, but not, I don't know if I was my ancestor or not. So, yeah.
Well, just a little something for you to ponder now.
Exactly.
There have been times when I've been traveling about, and I know that I'm experiencing, as a first person, I'm back, here I am. And one confirmation I had of that was 9 years ago in Egypt at the Temple of Isis at Abydos. And I walked in, and one of the docents, who happened to be a Muslim man, looked at me and he started to weep, which is completely out of character.
Yeah.
And he walked up to me and he said, "You've returned to your temple. It's so good to have you back."
Wow.
I was with Rosalie Britton. And he walked up and he said, "In a moment, I'll let you down into the oracle room. There are a group of French people down visiting the oracle room, and then I'll let you return." And sure enough, a whole group of lovely French people came up, and he said, "Priestess, do remember that Horus is on the left wall." Wow. And then when, she and I left, he began to weep again. And I thought, in my mind and in my soul in that moment, he recognizes me. And it was the sort of weeping that came from his soul, like, here's my long lost friend or somebody that I've known. Yeah. That was my introduction to, I think I've been here before, and this man is confirming that for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had kind of just that feeling of knowing when we were in the Fairy Glen, and that first day when we were in Ireland this past year. Just when I laid down in that grass and surrounded by all those stones, it felt very familiar to me. Mm-hmm. Just the energy, and it felt beyond just the energy of the place. And I can't explain what it was beyond that, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which leads us to old souls. Nicole, if you say to somebody, "Gee, you must be a very old soul," or "Your child is an old soul," what does that mean to you when you say someone is an old soul?
Deep wisdom, intuition, knowing things that, someone shouldn't know, or, deep knowing.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Cad?
So this is interesting. I actually, was taking care of or was actually seeing a patient at the hospital this week, an infant that was 6 weeks old. And when I looked at this baby, I said to the parents, he's got a really kind of grumpy look on his face. Does he? They say,
man.
They said he looks like They said he looks constantly like a grumpy old man. I thought, this is a soul that's been here before. Before the end of our time, he was smiling and stuff like that. But there were a couple of times when I looked at him, I thought, you little guy have been around here before. So yeah. I mean, and working with children, especially, I think there have been times where a child may say something to me or the way they look at me. There have been times when I'm caring for a child, and the way they look at me tells me that they're seeing beyond me.
Yeah.
Seeing not me as the person that's physically caring for them at that moment, but seeing me as spirit or as who I truly am. And so, I think children especially, and sometimes they'll just come out and say something, and I'm like, oh, yeah, you've been around the block a little bit.
I wondered, in the work that you do as a pediatric nurse practitioner, there have got to be some old souls in little bodies that you've encountered in your years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Carla Jo in the chat room is sharing an experience that she had. She's saying, the first time I drove through downtown Salt Lake City, the 6 lanes disappeared and became dirt. The sidewalks became wood. The stores were wooden with false fronts. And that quickly, it was back to 1975. So just in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing that, Carla Jo.
Denise, I don't know if you recall, remember when I went to Mankato?
Yeah.
It came back from Mankato.
From the 38? Dakota 38?
Yeah, it was the 150th anniversary, I think, of the Dakota 38.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I shared with you at that, after I came back, what a difficult time I had there in relationship to things like there was times where I felt like someone had me by the neck. Or just, the energy was so intense. I think I talked about the warrior energy as those horsemen came down the road, but it just the energy was and the intensity of that energy was just very overwhelming to me when I was there, and just I don't know. It like I said, that was another one of those experiences where I felt like maybe I had been there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what experience I particularly had there, but it just felt so familiar. And even walking on the ground where they had the hangings and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And your biological mother lives in Minnesota.
Yes. Yeah.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Delmarie Bradfield, our wonderful Chue, is in the chat room, and she has a question. She says, I have a question for you 3.
All
right. When someone you have never seen or heard of before comes in your dreams and they tell you their name and says they are looking after you, but you never hear or see them in your dream again, what happened to them? What do you think that is, Nicole?
Wow. I mean, I would go first to maybe I'm thinking spirit guide, an ancestral guide of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
That's someone that's looking over from the other side.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Del, do you remember what this person looked like? Did they look ancestral or feel ancestral? Cad, what would you say to our Dell?
Well, yeah, and I guess I wondered, did that person appear to her as a native person, or was it someone that was totally different from who she was? You know, was it a white person, or yeah?
Okay, well, let her answer that question. That's a great question. I mean, for me, I think that we have so many ancestors that become like our guardian spirits. I really believe that our ancestors are with us. And particularly when we're going through tumultuous times personally or in the family or community or in, where we are right now globally, I believe that the ancestors draw near, and some of them are so ancient we may not recognize them. And that's why I always say to people when we're talking about ancient ancestors, they may not look. Dell is saying she was an old native woman. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Chue, I would say that that's one of your ancestors.
Yeah.
And how did she feel? Did she feel comforted? Did she feel scared? I mean, I'm guessing comforted, but
that's a great question.
That would be another clue of,
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. One of the things that we know with ancestry, people you can feel as though you're being visited by an ancient ancestor, but you may step back and say, hey, hold up, wait a minute. They don't look Irish to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because we have such a small glimpse of who our ancestors are.
Yeah.
For most people, the tradition is maybe you know who your great-great-grandparents were.
Yeah.
But when we go into the antiquity of our bloodline,
right.
For me, going into the antiquity of my bloodline, there is no bloodline that shows up for me other than Sardinian or African before the 14th century. Before that, according to the testing as it is right now, everything in my blood and bones was Sardinian, which is, that country off the coast of Italy, or African.
Yep.
So if I were to have an ancestral dream unaware of that, I might be surprised that, an Italian Mediterranean person shows up in my dreams and says, I am your relative.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or from Africa saying, I am your relative. So I think one of the beautiful things about exploring ancestry is really learning about who's way back there, because they probably may not look like we look like right now. I mean, how do you feel about that, Nicole?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how, if we all trace back to the same woman who I want to say is like in Africa.
Yep.
Right? And at what point, I was reading something that we're all like, they can trace us to where it wasn't that long ago, like a few thousand years, where we were all had the same kind of descendants or something. So I'm just thinking how, and like we're all could be 120th cousins or something.
Right.
So like, if you think of how different so many of us look, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how did we all look at one point?
Exactly. And I believe now they even have a grandmother or a woman in Scandinavia. So we have an Earth Mother in Africa, and I believe one in Scandinavia.
Very
cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's fascinating.
And and when you think about it, like evolutionary wise, I'm just thinking about how, we all have shaped differently, which is part of why we've survived as a species, in many ways. Like just our differences is what contributes, which is shared too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to articulate it, but like we all can go back to being relatives, but like the shared purpose, but then also are being different, both being valuable.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
It's outstanding. I mean, what do you feel about that, Cad?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have been talking with one of my cousins who has done a lot of work on ancestry, and after our last radio show, I had this little woman that would show up in my meditations. Little short woman with white hair and a bun and a little black dress, and she had this cane, and she tap this cane all the time. And it was interesting because not anyone I recognize, but my cousin has a lot of photos of my ancestors, and so she was sharing them with me. And as she was sharing them with me, all of a sudden, this photo came across, and there was this woman.
Wow!
I'd never seen the picture. I'd never seen a picture. She's my great grandmother.
Wow!
And my cousin confirmed, yes, she was a very tiny woman. In the picture, she's dressed in this completely black dress. I'm anxious to ask her if I don't know if she would have known her or not, but I'm anxious to ask her if she walked around with a cane. But yeah, so it's and she still shows up. I mean, she's been showing up periodically. Just kind of, if she wants to get my attention, she taps her cane on the ground. So.
And what do you feel like her purpose is with you?
So interestingly, one of the things that also shows up with her is a white snake.
Oh.
And she seems to be some type of guide for me. And there's information that she's seeming to, or she's letting me know that I need to become acquainted with some information. And so she kind of tells me to follow the white snake into this place, and we have conversations and things like that. So it's been interesting for me to, it was fascinating to see that picture and go, wow, wait, that's the lady I've been seeing. Oh. Yeah.
Really cool.
That's outstanding. I love that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I love that. Well, we can all agree that we all go back to tribes. We're all tribal people.
Yeah.
And we come from many tribes, and some of our most ancient ancestors are helping us from the other side, walking with us on the other side, and walking with their tribal wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I've always known. I don't remember a time in my life where I didn't know that tribal people were with me, that old people were with me.
Yes.
And that is such a comfort for me. Nicole, growing up, or even with Sophia, little angel, talk about an old soul. Mm-hmm. Knowing that the ancestors with the old tribal wisdoms and blessings are walking alongside you. But as a mother, isn't it comforting to also know that the ancestors walk with your daughter?
Yes, especially because, we can't always be with, our children, and we entrust their lives with other people, right? But to know that there's something very spiritual that's also occurring, mm-hmm. that's taking care of them ancestrally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's comforting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I think of tribal, I think of community, and I think of tight community, and I think of the teachings and the wisdom and the blessings and the hardships and all of the things that people here on planet Earth go through in their human experiences. Cad, at what point in your life do you believe that you were attracted to tribe, or the feeling of tribe or tribalism? And what was that like for you?
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things that's been that's actually been a result of this whole COVID-19 thing for me was me recognizing how much of my tribe is the people that I work with at the hospital.
Mm.
And one of the things that has been very, very difficult is many people are working virtually from home.
Right.
So essentially, I'm sitting in an office area by myself. And one of the things that has been very difficult is I've realized how much that interaction on a daily basis is really important to me, and really, helps feed me and things like that. And so, just I was talking with someone about this just the other day. I miss my tribe, and I think we have, personally, I think we have more than one tribe. I belong to the tribe at the hospital. I belong to, I have a tribe outside the hospital of my spiritual community. That's an interesting question about knowing about your tribe, because I guess growing up, I probably would have considered the church that I grew up in as my tribe.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing about that tribe was they weren't willing to accept anyone into the tribe unless they thought and believed and just exactly like they were, like they did. And so sometimes that was really challenging for me, because I thought, why would someone, why shouldn't I accept someone just because they don't think this the way I do or believe the way I do? Aren't we really all one big tribe? Aren't we one human race?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the last, probably 10 years of my life, that's really where I've become much more aware of the fact that we do a lot to, hold people off who are not like us,
Mm-hmm.
and who don't think like us, don't believe like us, whatever, versus really just recognizing the diversity of the human tribe and being able to accept each other as brothers and sisters,
Mm-hmm.
and aunts and uncles and grandpas and grandmas, and really, and I think that that's kind of what we're starting to experience in the world right now. I think kind of that whole idea of this separateness that's
Mm-hmm.
been preached to us for such a long time is kind of, people are saying, no, we are a human race.
Mm-hmm.
We have our unique qualities, but we are a family. And so, I would say for me, it's probably been the last 10 years.
Thank you for that, Cad. And Carla Joe is commenting on what you just shared. Cad, that was one of the reasons I stepped away from organized religion and why I am not a member of a coven.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicole, what about you? I mean, when did you first, was it as a young woman, recognize affinity toward tribe? Was it something you experienced that was tribal, or what is tribe to you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a really tight-knit group of girlfriends, and many of whom I've been friends with since I was, 10 in my teens, my 20s. But I feel such a sisterhood, and have always felt so connected. And part of that connection is we love and accept one another despite our differences. So everything that you're saying, Kat, about just, it's our uniqueness, it's our diversity and our differences that make us belong.
Yes.
And if we can start to celebrate what unifies us rather than what divides us, which you're right, has been taught to us, right, for so long,
yeah.
And kept us separate, and that's starting to kind of awaken and finding the humanness in one another. And that's what I've gotten from my sisterhood, is that knowing I'm going to be loved no matter what, and being different. Like none of us are the same. And I'm thinking of like the psychological term of groupthink, where if we all think alike, that's not evolutionarily, from an evolutionary standpoint, good for us. so the importance of accepting one another in spite of our differences and celebrating those, while still connecting through kindness and humanity, right? So
absolutely. Yeah. It's I think it kind of goes back to that. I've said this once before on the show. That greeting that they used on the Avatar, that they would say to each other, "I see you."
Yeah.
And I see you in all of your glory, all your beauty, and the person, and your spirit. And then the person responds back to them, and I am here. And so as you pointed out, Nicole, it's being able to see just the beauty in each other versus the difference.
Yeah, and like we all, so much of what can connect us is like, we might not share experiences at all, but hearing one another's story, and we speak the common language of emotion, and like, feeling lonely or betrayed or whatever. And if you can get into a place of that, it's to be able to bear witness to someone else's story and love them anyway. Mm-hmm. That's so healing. And and I think if we can explore back to a tribe, and I've done some work on just like the concept of depression as like these depressive symptoms is actually where you feel like you don't belong.
Yes.
Right. So like if we can research back to our tribes where people felt belongingness, right? And yes. So depression was actually a way of flagging someone that they need something to help them feel like they belong.
Yeah.
So like, for example, if you were, let's say you were a hunter and you got injured and you could no longer do that, getting that person some activity that made them feel like they still belong to that tribe, because the depressive symptoms would be a way of saying, uh-oh, I don't belong here. Something's happening, right? So,
yeah.
And it's such an epidemic right now of depressive symptoms and people feeling lonely in a room full of people, and how to get back to, that tribe mentality.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, one of the things I was just going to share, just for me personally, for my own life, I realized that it was my feelings of isolation and my feelings of being disconnected for being different that fueled my history of addiction. Because I felt so different and I felt disconnected and isolated from the world, that's what I would use. It was feeling really disconnected from my tribe, from my people. As you said, Nicole, it was kind of those depressive symptoms, and just that whole idea of what disconnection does to people and what isolation does to people. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Listening to you both, I'm enjoying everything that you're sharing. And so we're talking about soul tribes and we're talking about blood and bone tribes. And I think that we have both. We have soul tribes and we have those tribes that are, coursing through our blood and our bones. And sometimes our soul recognizes our tribe and they may not share the same blood and bones, but our souls know one another. I see you, exactly what you're talking about, Cad. And yes, Nicole, the idea that feeling the absence of tribe, of community, of somebody there to hold the net, the safety net, to be there in time of crisis and in times of joy. The longing for that leaves such an empty space for so many people right now. And I agree with both of you. And won't it be a wonderful thing when all of us finally can decide that we belong to a greater tribe? We do have the tribe that belongs in our blood and our bones, and we
Yes.
have the tribe that belongs to our soul, and then we have the tribe called the human tribe.
Yes, yes.
That doesn't delineate by how dark is your skin. Well, you're too fair skinned to be one of us. Well, you're too dark skinned to be one of us. Well, you don't have any color at all. Who do you belong to?
Right.
You know, there are even factions that delineate who belongs where based on the shade of coloring of skin. And I would have hoped, and maybe that's where we're moving toward, is a greater tribe.
Yeah.
Some ancient prophecies say the
Yes.
rainbow tribe.
Oh,
When I say that, Nicole, rainbow tribe, what does that mean to you?
Oh, like total acceptance for diversity, rather than allowing the diversity to separate and distance and polarize us, right? Like to celebrate it and to allow it to bring us together is like, you know, acceptance and being you, being authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you, Cad?
Yeah, I think of when I see a rainbow and just how much, and even when you're surrounded by other people, when they see a rainbow, just how much joy it brings to people. And the thing that I love about a rainbow is that each color, it remains distinct. The colors kind of start to blend in with each other. So there's still that distinction. There's still, we have our various races. We have our black people, we have our yellow people, we have our red people, we have our white people. All of those are a very beautiful part of the rainbow, but the rainbow is beautiful because of everyone in it. Mm-hmm. And so, I think it's that blending as we can come together and we lose our distinction at all. Because I think we need to have, we still need to honor the distinction of the various races and the cultures and things. Mm-hmm. But I think it's when we come together and start working together and honor one another for who they are and what they can teach me and what we can teach each other. I think that's what I love about the idea of the rainbow. Yep.
I know recently Warfield Moose, and Todd and I love Warfield Moose, the songs, and we sing those in the NEP. His teachings at Mita Oyate, he talks about recently the sharing of wisdom and that it's time to share because so many people around the world, and for lots of reasons, I'm not saying that there aren't reasons for it, but they clutch onto the teachings as though it's the last shred of, whatever they have left of the tribe. Yes. And so Warfield put together this little bit about the fact that he feels that it's time to share.
Yeah.
It's time to share the beauty. And because in the sharing is where there's understanding.
Right.
Yes. And I love that idea of the sharing. And even going back to religion, there were times when Catholic people certainly couldn't tell about what goes on in that Catholic church, right? Which only then, of course, raised eyebrows and suspicion of everybody around me who wasn't Catholic. Right? But once the veil comes off and the sharing begins, and that's part of my job here, I think, on Grandmother in this lifetime, is to share those things in a good way. Yeah. Because the more that we share, we have an appreciation for the beauty of the uniqueness, but also then we're not setting it aside as, well, they think they're better than us, or that what they have is superior to ours. It's let's share. Just like a buffet, right? A buffet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we're kind of hearing based on some of the things that have been going on in the world in the last several weeks is that what needs to happen is we need to listen.
Yeah.
We really need to listen to each other.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's just listening with our ears. Mm-hmm. I believe listening with our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And to really listen, because a lot of what I see going on with just the chaotic experience that we're having right now is people don't feel like they've been heard,
Mm-hmm.
and heard for a long time, and we really need to just be able to have those conversations where we're listening with our heart, and to what each other needs, to what each other can bring, what we bring to each other. So.
Mm-hmm. And so, Nicole, when we talk about that, everybody has really deep feelings about things. And, before we got on the show tonight, I shared with you my thoughts about the Confederate flag. And I have deep thoughts about the Confederate flag because it is part of my family's history. And how do we, when we're telling our story or when we're listening to somebody's thoughts about something that is so potentially provocative of all sorts of emotions, how do we move out of our pain body or our body that says the way that I feel about it is the only way? How do we move out of that into a space of let me hear it from a place of neutrality so then I can understand?
Great question.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the importance of like being curious, right? Getting really, really curious. It's like, and holding more, having the ability, like we as a species, especially where we're at, I think in our evolution, we have the ability to hold more than one truth at a time.
Yes.
So there may be 2 truths, there may be 5 truths, there may be 10 truths plus, right? So being curious about another person's story and wanting to like hold space for their story and making it about them in that moment, while also holding the truth for our story, and so often we feel these like conflicting feelings that really can wreak havoc on us. Like, I'm feeling such deep shame for myself, but gosh, I'm feeling such compassion for them. How do we like emotionally handle that, right? Because it's really it's intense to be able to hold conflicting truths.
Yes.
And so that's where, a lot of the work that I do is teaching and educating, but also holding space through modeling that there can be the ability to have your own thoughts and feelings without one being right versus wrong. They're all kind of various forms of truth, and, growing our ability to like, I can't think of the word I want, but like, to just like transcend, to have more visual or more capacity, is to say, I don't know what it was like for you, but I want to know, right?
Yeah.
And the healing that can come through that for both people.
Wow.
Yep.
That's big.
Yeah. But I think as a species, like, we're ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're ready for that. And what kind of world will we allow ourselves to live in if we do that from an evolution standpoint? Because so much has been about survival for thousands of years, and we're getting to a place where we can transcend that like immediate survival need. And we're seeing it with everything that's happening through this pandemic in some ways, right? Like, because it's taken us a lot into our primitive brain, into the survival brain, but like through our ancestors, we've got a lot of that because we've done it many, many times before. Now it's this soul expansion, this heart expansion. It's about healing, I think, in so many ways.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Because it can be hard when, something is brought up, and it can, deep-rooted subjects can be very provocative. And to be able to have the emotional intelligence and the intellectual, sometimes intelligence, to be able to step aside and to just be there to hold space for the stories to be told and the reasons for those thoughts and feelings. And I love what you said, that we can hold 2, 3, 4, 5 truths. We can hold many of those because they come from different angles and different experiences, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, and like sitting through like, wow, I'm feeling such embarrassment for my, for my something that's happened on my end, but I also recognize that if I make it about my embarrassment in this moment, it's not about this other person at all, right? So it's like allowing space for our own feeling of embarrassment while still recognizing compassion for this other person, or, just bearing witness to. And that's tough to do, but easy once you kind of start to recognize it.
I really like that. Thank you for sharing that.
One of the things I wonder about, Nicole, is, do you think that some of it is difficult because we've just never we've just tucked those emotions down inside of us when we hear something that doesn't resonate with us, and so a lot of times, we're not always even responding to what's going on with that particular person, but we're responding based on something that's still sitting down there that could have been down there for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so the other part of that, I think, is really being present. Being present with that person and trying to not work from our history, but just from what's happening in that moment.
Yeah, like being mindful or being like, it's like, I'm going to put me and my feelings on hold, or I'm going to manage those later. Because, gosh, Kat, I'm so curious about what it was like for you. Yeah.
Because that can even happen in families. I mean, within a family, we can have 3, 4, 5 siblings. And if you ask any one of those siblings what their experience of growing up was, it can be very, very different and sometimes diametrically opposed.
Yes. Great point.
Yeah.
Yes.
So holding space to be able to say, but your truth does not invalidate mine.
Right. There's not a right or wrong in that regard, right?
Exactly.
Or like a black or a white. It's like all shades of gray, or you know what I'm saying? It's that that separateness that we so easily say, well, if that was your experience and that was different than mine, then that means I'm wrong. And it's like, no, it's all true and all not true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think people are real comfortable with the gray.
No.
It's easier to be kind of that this way or that way, but when you can listen to and kind of allow yourself to be in the gray, I think that there's a lot of beauty in that.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I asked in the chat room thoughts about the rainbow tribe, and Carla Joe responded with, without even one color, there is no rainbow. It takes every color in its beauty to make the rainbow, just as it takes all shades of people to make the human race. And Del Marie weighed in with, prophecies of rainbow people coming under the tree of life is that the color of people, the color of wisdom, joy, happiness, talents, gifts, etc., is to be. It may be slow, but it is happening, beginning with people coming together at Standing Rock, and we see people coming together to support one another now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chue Wopila, for that. Yeah. And the communication, as Carla Jo pointed out, listening is not only between colors, but between ages and sexes and genders.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
So sometimes we can have a whole lot to set aside on the outside of the listening circle, so that, as Kat said, we can be fully present in the here and now, and not necessarily letting the trauma of our ancestors supersede the here and now, because our ancestors and their experiences are in our blood and bones. And sometimes that's the provocateur. That is the provocateur. It's the voice that says, oh, but it wasn't like that. That's not what we experienced, but this is what they did to me. So even, putting aside the voices of the ancestors and just being fully present is such a gift in really good dialogue. Don't you think? Or am I crazy?
No. I think that's really true. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes it's and Nicole probably can speak to this a little bit better, but I think sometimes it's really hard to know to get a hold of that feeling in regard to what's going on with me right now, and sometimes there's just that reaction rather than that, simply stepping back from that feeling and saying, okay, why am I feeling this? Is this mine? Does it belong to someone else? And so, I know I'm guilty of that.
Sure. Well, and I'm thinking how it's so easy to get lost in trying to avoid the feeling or dismiss the feeling or shame the feeling, where it's if we can be present with the feeling and learn from that even too, right? Is this mine or is this someone else's? Or, what might this be wanting to teach me? And getting comfortable with having a depth of feelings, which we have 30 plus feelings in a day. Most of us are aware of a few. So just as a side note, but
that's what I love about you.
30 feelings in a day. What?
Yeah, 30 plus. Yeah.
Well, as we're wrapping up here at the top of the hour, I am a firm believer in, or I feel that right now, everything that we are experiencing here on terra firma, on Grandmother Earth, is not only helping to heal what's going on presently, but I do believe that we are also doing some healing work and some rebalancing, maybe harmonizing would be a better word, of our ancestors going back into antiquity and going forward into our ancestry until we are the antiquity. And I feel as though we have an amazing opportunity right now, as Del and Carla Jo pointed out, to be open to the sharing of gifts and talents and coming to a meeting place. How do you feel about that, Nicole?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of the power of that authenticity, right? Of sharing your gifts and talents that only each of us is so unique that only we have to share, and celebrating that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And for those right now, just because we are here, we are where we are, Nicole, and you are a therapist. For those right now that are feeling absolute blinding rage, because there's a lot of rage, and I think it's surprising some people. It's not just people who are, out on the streets looting and rioting. They're not protesting. It's a different animal that's out there looting and rioting while the people are protesting. How do we, very shortly, are there things that we can do with that rage?
Feel it, express it in a healthy way, whether that be with a loved one, talking about it, coloring your rage, writing, speaking to it through journaling, gardening, something that will allow you to feel it. And oftentimes anger, it's what's considered a secondary emotion. So it's all of these other emotions connected into it. So you might be actually feeling 10 plus emotions in that rage. So being able to identify and label those other emotions, name it to tame it. Maybe it's sadness, hopelessness, despair, discouragement, helplessness, disappointment, all of these other emotions that are all rolled into it. So being able to get in touch with those too.
I remember when Dane was 15, I bought him a heavy bag and I put it out in the garage, and I bought him a pair of boxing gloves. And I said, go for it, right? He beat the heck out of that thing during his teenage years. To properly channel it for him needed to be physical, right? Right? So not to just stuff it down, because if we stuff it down, it's coming back up. But there are ways to channel the rage. And usually social media is not the best way to do that.
Right.
Right. So thank you for that, Nicole. Cad, as we're wrapping up tonight, what is the last word from you, my shaman medicine friend?
Well, I just think that we're at a great time in history where we are finally coming together. We're coming together as a human family, and I'm really anxious to see how the next weeks and months are going to transpire for all of us. So
Beautifully said. I love that. I think good things are coming.
yeah.
As I say, we are in the he-hoos of labor. And you know what that means, Cad. You know what that means, Nicole. We're right. It's baby's getting ready to crown, and we're in that he-hoo. Right. Yeah. Don't push quite yet, but it's time to push now. And here we are. So hold the light, everybody. Hold the light, and ask your ancient and illuminated ancestors to hold the light from their place in ancestry as we elevate the consciousness here on Grandmother Earth. With that, everybody, have a beautiful evening. Cad, Nicole, thank you for being you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being you. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.